Hello and welcome to today's video, brought to you on location from South Kensington in London. But why am I here? Well, I'm going on a mission to understand the history of a very special object on display at the Science Museum. So come with me as I head up to the Information Age exhibition on level 2. And here it is, the golden BBC Micro. I mean, just look at the thing. It is a work of art. It's really beautiful to look at. But that's not the only reason that this machine has fascinated me ever since I first came across it in the Information Age exhibition several years ago. I'm also plagued by questions about it. Who made it? Why did they make it? Who originally owned it? And has it had more than one owner? Does it actually work? And perhaps crucially of all, how has it ended up here in the Science Museum in London? Well, in this video, I'm going to attempt to address those questions as we go on the trail of the golden BBC Micro. So I suppose the first question we should address is, why does the golden BBC Micro look the way that it does? I mean, after all, this is a BBC Micro. In fact, it's my BBC Micro, and this is very much the conventional shape and design that you would expect for a machine of that name. But the golden BBC Micro doesn't look like this. I mean, if we leave the gold plating to one side, it's a very different configuration. For one thing, the keyboard is separate from the main unit, and for another, it's got integrated disk drives. My BBC Micro here is just shown as the original unit, and I haven't got any other peripherals connected. But if I did, they would sit probably on the top or to the side, and they wouldn't be part and parcel of the overall computer. But if we look at the golden BBC Micro, I mean, it really doesn't look like this at all. So what's going on? Well, back in 1985 through until probably late 1986, there was a brief trend for computing manufacturers to ship BBC Micros in different configurations. In part, this was driven by the popularity of the PC machine, which was starting to have a big footprint in the United States, and even in the UK, the PC was starting to be something that people were aware of, predominantly in business still, but nevertheless a machine that had a certain cachet. And so there were companies, probably principal among them Viglen, who thought that it would be a really good idea to create BBC Micros but in a different sort of configuration with separate parts. So they thought, well, we'll release the keyboard from the main unit and have that separately connected via what I would refer to as a sort of phone-like cable into the main unit, and in some cases even integrate the disk drives into that unit as well. So is the golden BBC Micro in fact a Viglen BBC? Well, no, because Viglen weren't actually the only company doing this at the time. There were others. Another such company, whose adverts you will have probably seen in the magazines back in the day, Micro User, Acorn User, etc., was a company called Oak, which I personally think is a brilliant pun. I mean, acorns coming from oak. So Oak, puns to one side, were another manufacturer similar to Viglen who promoted the idea of a BBC Micro with a basically different build. Still the same unit, still the same electronics and components inside it, but from a hardware perspective and a user experience perspective, it looked and felt different. Maybe it made you feel like you were using a PC rather than a conventional Beeb. And in fact, Oak, if you look very closely at the golden Beeb, you will notice that their logo appears both on the main computing unit and on the keyboard itself. So we're starting to come towards a bit of an understanding of where the golden Beeb might have been made. But that doesn't address why, and certainly if you'd looked through Oak's back catalogue in the day, you wouldn't have just been able to thumb down the listings and go, I'll get my Beeb in gold instead of beige, because really there was only one such machine. But to understand how that came about, we're going to need to dip into the magazine archives, and in this case my own personal archive of micro user magazines, starting with the March 1985 edition. And as if by magic, here it is. This is in fact the March 1985 edition of the Micro User, and you can imagine my excitement when I came across this magazine because, of course, pride of place on the front cover is none other than the golden BBC Micro itself. Now, this edition of the magazine made a great big show of this machine. It was pride of place on the front cover, and it was designed to launch a very special competition. And the competition prize winner would be the lucky recipient of none other than the golden BBC Micro itself. So we're going to take a look at the article in this magazine which explains how the prize has come about, what the competition is all about, and then hopefully we're going to thumb through a few more editions of the magazine to understand what happened next. So it's first important to understand exactly why this happened in the first place. Well, as you can see on the contents page here, the Micro User was at this stage 2 years old, and in fact the March 1985 edition marked the second birthday of the Micro User. And as it says here, thanks to the enthusiastic support of our ever-growing number of readers, in 2 years we have become the #1 magazine for BBC Micro users. So that's what they were celebrating, and they decided that to celebrate that birthday they were going to launch a rather special contest and some very attractive offers. So we're going to turn to page 94, as it says here, to learn more. And here we are, page 94 and 95. Help us celebrate our birthday and win the fabulous gold BBC Micro. Now, interestingly enough, at this stage, there isn't actually a photograph of the golden Beeb. There is really only an artist's impression, which does make me wonder if perhaps the Beeb hadn't been manufactured at this point. Might also explain why it took several months before the winner was eventually announced, but more on that later. So at this stage the magazine simply launched the competition and held out the golden Beeb as the potential prize. And you can see here a limited amount of information about the golden Beeb. So as far as we're concerned, this is priceless, and due to the fact that it's unique, managing editor Derek Meakin said, what more fitting way could there be to mark the spectacular success of our magazine? Now, it does make it clear that it's a gold-plated BBC Micro, so not solid gold, but it is in fact a fully functional Beeb. And it also comes with 2 1MB disk drives and an 85-watt power supply unit. The most fabulous prize ever to be given away by a computer magazine, and as you can see here, it has been commissioned from the Universal Communications Company based in Bradford, West Yorkshire. Now that's interesting because of course the UCC actually was the parent company, and they marketed their products under the Oak label specifically for BBC Micro. So that was a clever bit of marketing. The company itself had a slightly boring name, if we're honest, Universal Communications Company, but the Oak label, which ties neatly in with Acorn, makes all the difference. So as you can see here, they talk about the fact that Oak already retails basic processor and detachable keyboard packages at £110, up to the model that has everything at nearly £1,500. And you can see here David Atkins, head of UCC, who said it's certainly the most unusual and expensive job we've ever tackled to date. So our only problem now is how we're going to keep on top of this when it comes time to celebrate our 3rd birthday celebration. Perhaps a platinum Beeb might have been planned. But let's have a look more about the competition itself. As you can see here, this is the entry form. Again, the previous owner of this magazine obviously didn't choose to enter. But what they were looking for were basically 5 suggested articles that somebody might expect to see in the March 1988 edition of the magazine, so 3 years later. And effectively what they were looking for were some creative ideas about where computing technology might have taken us by then. And that's effectively what the competition wanted you to submit. So if you were particularly creative, if you were particularly future thinking, you would have come up with some suggested article titles, put in the titles here and sent off your competition application. And fingers crossed, you may well have won the golden BBC Micro. But at this stage, that's all there is to say really about the Golden Beeb. Not a lot of information, as I say, probably because it didn't actually physically exist at this point. It was a commission, but there's only an artist's impression. So I wonder how long it took to actually make it. Well, we need to turn to the next magazine in the series that covers the Golden Beeb to understand a little bit more about it. So now we turn to the April 1985 edition of the Micro User, which came out obviously directly after the March edition. And you can see in the top corner here the making of the Gold Micro. And it's not an artist's impression anymore, this is a photograph. And it bears an uncanny resemblance to the very same Golden Beeb which sits in the Science Museum today. So, the Micro User clearly wanted to get its money out of the Golden Beeb, because of course they weren't launching the competition winner at this stage, but they did want to get a bit more mileage out of the Golden Beeb itself with a nice story inside telling us more about the Golden Beeb. So let's have a look and see what more there is to learn. And so here we can see on the contents page here another first from the Micro User, but more importantly the Golden Micro on page 30. The story behind the making of our unique gold-plated version of the BBC Micro. And here we have it, a nice manufacturing double spread here, the making of a Golden Micro, and once again a lovely photograph. So we know it's real at this point. And so if you'd had any reticence about, entering the competition in the previous issue of the Micro User, thinking, well, is this thing for real? It turns out that yes, it is. And you can see the stages here of the gold plating, starting off with copper and then through to nickel, and then finally here with this chap looking extremely happy, being plated in gold. So it's worth taking a look at some of the highlights here as well. The Gold BBC Micro, since it was announced the Micro User was giving it away, the idea has captured the imagination of the computer world and far beyond. So they've now claimed that it's valued at £5,000, although they've thrown in here that it's considered priceless for people that are particularly au fait with the Beeb. And it's even reached those most discriminating of people at London's top store, Harrods. Now, how much of this we can take at face value, I don't know, because as far as I'm aware, the Golden Beeb that sits in the Science Museum is one of a kind. But certainly in this article there is some suggestion that consideration is being given to making more gold micros to sell to oil-rich Arabs out in the Middle East. As it says here, I'm sure that many of our wealthier customers would be pleased to own something like this, a spokesman told the Micro User. Now you've got to hand it to UCC, the team at Oak. They really are giving it all it's worth here. Now, having made something that they valued at £5,000, they're clearly very keen to see if they could try and turn this into a product line in its own right. Of course, the magazine is happy to back them up. All of this is not really surprising in light of the fact that the Micro User's Gold Micro has been made to the most exacting standards. So a little bit about UCC here. They're based in Bradford in West Yorkshire. They were commissioned to make the Golden Beeb, and they are apparently #1 in the field of customised casings for the Beeb. I'm not sure how Viglen would have felt about that, but there's a fair amount of information in here about the gold plating process. In fact, the plating itself took place at B&W Plating near Crawley in Sussex, so not actually carried out by Oak themselves. And there's some pretty detailed information here about the gold plating process, as I say, going through the various coatings and how you actually achieve a gold plate. But yes, as you can see, this is the first and as such will remain the most valuable in the world. I'm pretty sure that it did remain the only one of its kind. Now we are a little bit more about Oak here. So this is really a puff piece about Oak themselves, really going to town about how the previously separate career courses together with a high-tech application of an old adage, if a man builds a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to his door. I mean, this is proper business puff language here going on, but fair enough. They obviously decided that they wanted to try and get as much publicity out of this machine as they could. There's even a little bit here about the backing of city financiers as well. So there you have it. The idea has proved a tremendous success. Orders for Oak systems are increasing at the rate of 50% a month for packages ranging in price from £200 to £2,000. So, as I say, it was a bit of a fad back in 1985, this whole concept of a separate Beeb keyboard and computing unit. and this article certainly makes it suggest that this is the future and that this is what businesses are crying out for. Sadly or not, depending on your point of view, this trend of separating the keyboard from the main unit didn't really last much beyond 1986. Some of that could probably be traced back to the BBC Master, because of course once the Master was launched it was just a much more powerful machine than the Beeb, the original BBC Micro, and actually the sort of, if you like, the gimmick of having the keyboard and the computing unit separated didn't really make much of a difference to the overall computing power. If you were going to spend this kind of money, after all, you'd have been better off buying a BBC Master, and I believe that's what most people who had that kind of money would have done back in the day. But nevertheless, there you go. This article certainly makes it clear how the Golden Beeb was made, so that answers one of the important questions that I started at the beginning of this video. So what remains is to see, who did it actually go to? Who won that competition? And now we come to the final micro user magazine in this particular story. It's got a bit of gold on the cover, but that's actually referring to The Hobbit. It's got nothing to do with the Golden BBC Micro itself. But it is in this edition, the July 1985 edition of the Micro User, that we finally come to learn who the lucky competition winner was, and indeed why they won the competition. So this is an important magazine in the history of the Golden Beeb, even though sadly there's nothing on the cover to indicate the fact. And we're going to take a look and learn what we can about that lucky winner. Well, as we can see in the July 1985 edition from the contents page, unlike the March and April editions, you wouldn't even know that there was any information to be had about the Golden Beeb and that competition. It feels a little bit peculiar because it was launched with such a song and dance, dominating the March 1985 edition of the magazine, and even with a whole follow-up article in April, and yet the months went by, we got to the July edition of the Micro User, and you wouldn't even know here that the competition had been won. Nevertheless, I've done my due diligence, and if we turn forward to page, gone slightly further forward there than I meant to. There we are, page 24, David collects his Golden Micro, and here it is, being presented to David MacLeod, who receives the Gold Micro from Derek Meakin, head of database publications, and of course, the editor of the Micro User. So a little bit about David in the write-up here. He was apparently an architect who originally bought a Beeb to help him with his work. And then he decided to enter the competition, and he was the winner. So he was 29 years old back in 1985, and he carried off what it says here, the world's most expensive home computer. So how did David manage to win? Well, according to the write-up here, his entry was judged to be the most imaginative of thousands submitted by readers of the magazine in his predictions of what might appear in the March 1988 issue. His vision of the future included networked video games, flat-screen monitors, fibre optics and satellite listening stations, all available to BBC Micro users. Now you've got to hand it to David, these predictions are pretty solid. I mean, all of these things have come to pass. Networked video games, of course, flat-screen monitors, I mean, they didn't quite come about by 1988, but certainly not that many years later on, they became pretty commonplace. Fibre optics, of course, are the connections for all of our broadband these days, and satellite listening stations, well, I mean, I'm sure GCHQ have got more to say about that than I do, but certainly none of these predictions have proven to be false. The only slightly sad part, I suppose, is this last little line here, all available to BBC Micro users, because of course, unfortunately, the BBC, by the time these kinds of technologies came about, had faded into the background and had been superseded by the likes of the PC and other Intel sort of machines, and sadly the Beeb wasn't able to take advantage of these networked video games, and indeed even connecting a flat screen to a BBC today is not the most straightforward, but probably more about that in another video in the future. Nevertheless, we have reached what seems to be the conclusion of our tale about the Golden BBC Micro. But this is where it actually gets quite mysterious, because it's very obviously stated here that David MacLeod won the Golden BBC Micro. But if we take a look at the little name plaque next to the BBC Micro itself in the Science Museum, there's no mention of David MacLeod. It actually says that the machine was donated by a Mrs. Barbara Oliver. So what happened between David winning the Golden Micro and it ending up in the Science Museum? Well, that's where things get a little bit mysterious, but that's what we're going to look at next. So let's jump forward to 2007. Tilly Blythe was working as the curator for computing at the Science Museum, and one day while she was cataloguing items at the museum's repository for small and medium-sized objects in Blythe House, she came across a rather unusual item, none other than the golden BBC Micro itself. There was no accompanying information to go with it other than a paper tag, and on the tag itself there was just the name Ron and a phone number. She duly called the number and learned that Ron himself had sadly passed away, but that a Mrs. Barbara Oliver, who was looking after his affairs, remembered that he had given the golden BBC Micro to the museum some time before, and that she was certain he would have wanted them to have it. So now we know that at some point between David MacLeod winning the competition in July 1985 and it being donated to the Science Museum, David must have decided to sell it. And this does ring true, because according to one Star.Forum user, he remembers seeing the winner selling it in the personal ads pages of a certain magazine back in the day. Apparently David had added a bunch more upgrades to it by then and was asking for quite a lot of money. We might never know if Ron was the original purchaser from David, or perhaps he bought it from somebody else, but what we can know for certain is that after winning the competition, the Golden Beeb did eventually change hands. I think I speak for Acorn fans the world over when I say that we are very lucky that Tilly rediscovered the machine amongst the many objects stored in the repository at Blythe House, and that she subsequently chose to make the machine a centrepiece, not only for the museum's Information Age exhibition, but also for her subsequent Nesta report on the legacy of the BBC Micro, on whose pages the Golden Beeb appears in pride of place, just as it did in the Micro User magazine all those years before. But wait, I hear you cry, does it actually work? Well, that's one mystery that will have to remain unsolved. The Science Museum's policy on this kind of thing is that for historic objects, they wouldn't typically run them. They try to keep things in their original historic form, and with the exception of reconstructions, their working objects policy is that they simply preserve them as is. In fairness, there's probably not much to be learned by turning it on. Other than answering the question of whether or not it works, it would in reality behave no differently from any other BBC Micro. Beebs don't have hard drives, and so therefore we're not going to recover any files or learn anything more by turning it on, other than simply the question of whether or not it works. And let's face it, all of us Beeb fans know that turning on an old Beeb comes with lots of risks in the form of exploding capacitors and magic smoke. So perhaps it's just as well that we leave the golden BBC Micro where it is and keep that power button firmly switched off. Well, there you have it. Originally a publicity stunt created in 1985, won in a magazine competition, sold in the private ads pages, and finally donated to end up here in the Science Museum at the heart of the Information Age exhibition, which is where I think it truly belongs. I hope that you've enjoyed this video and that you've enjoyed exploring the secrets of the Golden Beeb with me. If you've enjoyed this video, I hope that you'll like it. If you've got any other stories to tell about the Golden Beeb which I might have overlooked, do please leave me a comment in the comment section below. And if this is your kind of thing, why not subscribe to the channel? I make all sorts of Acorn related stuff, and I'm hoping to do more videos of this kind in the future too. In closing, I'd like to give special thanks to Brian Hogan, Tilly Blythe and Kevin Edwards, as well as the wonderful members of the Star.Forum. All of them have helped me in a tremendous way in putting together the research for this video and making it possible. I really couldn't have made it without you, so thank you very much. Now, I think I've seen a 6502 second processor over there, so I'm going to leave it here and hope to see you in the next video. And until then, goodbye!